Okay, very good. So we are on to the internet itself, understanding the internet. And I was thinking about this this morning, and I didn't have time to change it, but I probably should have, wrong pointer. This arrow that sends you from a server back to the router, I probably should have had it. It does route back through this same system here, so it doesn't go direct. It comes over this way, and this way I realize I'll get that corrected for one of these weeks. So we talked just briefly last time as we were finishing up our thinking on the principles surrounding this protection, the need to keep our hearts, to think on those things that are good, to think on those things that are right. And this is the impetus for us to guard these aspects, whether it be, and in all three of those areas. So we talked about social media, we talked about the elements of pornography, and then we talked about the dangers of consumption. All three of those can be mitigated through these various aspects, but we have to understand them to know what potential is there and where it is that we can really make these things work. Now, one of the other elements to this is there are some very, very straightforward and easy ways, in a sense, very straightforward ways to protect oneself through various companies and such, but those things can be very expensive. And some of those are simply outside the range of people to be able to afford a subscription of $30 or $40 a month to be able to have a all-encompassing service. And the question is, are there easier ways, cheaper ways for us to be able to get the same results, or at least results that are functional? So we talked through this chart, and we began by talking about the idea of the terminal. And let's go ahead and think through that. That's going to be our first stop, is this idea of a terminal. So a hardware, when I use the word hardware, hardware refers to the physical components of a computer, an electronic system. So the devices themselves, that would be the hardware. It's the silicon, it's the glass, it's the plastic, it's the buttons, it's the keyboard, it's the mouse, it's the monitor. Those things are all considered the hardware of the computer, the actual physical things that the computer runs on. I talked last time about the idea of a terminal. A terminal, what I mean by a terminal, is a device with the capability of accessing and consuming remote content. So if I've got a device and that device is not hooked up to any sort of internet, everything that's on the device is just running on the device, that would not be considered a terminal. That would be considered a personal computer, or we call it a smartphone, or whatever it might be. Of course, the phone element to that makes things a little different, but there are plenty of things that outside of the internet I can still use on a smartphone, or certainly on a computer. I can install an application, run that application, and as a general rule, I do not need the internet in order to do some of those things. That's becoming more and more rare today, but that's the idea of like a personal computer or a phone. A terminal, the idea of a terminal is that you have a very bare bones access or a simplistic level of access on the machine itself, and then the things that you're doing, you are reaching out to the internet or to some other larger, more powerful computer in order to see those things done. So as it relates to the various aspects of shopping, listening to music, watching video, and everything else, you've got the ability on your computer, if you go to YouTube, you have the ability on your computer to decode that information as it's coming and to run it. If you have a weaker computer, you probably can't actually run that video all the way up at a high resolution, what would be called 4K today. Your computer's not going to be able to handle decoding it as it's coming in fast enough to be able then to run 4K. If you have a powerful enough computer, you can do that. But all of the information is coming from YouTube servers. That's where all of the real heavy lifting is happening. And of course, that's where all the data is stored. So if you go to a site like YouTube or like Amazon and you search for something in the search bar, everything's happening on Amazon's end to deliver to you what you are looking for. And then if you're logged in, of course, you have your own little part of Amazon servers that is dedicated to giving you tailored interactions, specific advertisements, or whatever the case may be. So terminal here is a device with the capability of accessing or consuming remote content. For computers, they're going to use, the hardware they're going to use is either Ethernet or wireless card. Ethernet would be a physical plug. A wireless card would be a wireless connection to a router that then has the physical plug. Somewhere along the line, you're getting to a physical wire that is going to transmit that data. Smartphones, access through Wi-Fi and cellular. Now you can, depending on the idea with a tablet or a smartphone, you can also use Ethernet. It's a very rare thing that someone connects their phone or their tablet to an Ethernet jack, but it is possible. And then you have Internet of Things devices, home assistants and whatnot, and they're connected wirelessly almost exclusively. Now, is there a danger in home assistants? Let me ask you that. Any sort of Internet of Things devices, home assistants, is there a danger there? Is that something that we need to be thinking about too? Yeah, so as far as a privacy matter, home assistants are certainly a problem. You know, the ability for those devices to listen, and they say they aren't and whatever else, but the ability for those devices to listen most certainly is there. Does it become a spiritual issue? Well, any device that has a speaker or a screen can, right? Depending on your standard of music and whatever you might desire to protect yourself or your children from as it would relate to any elements of music. And then, of course, where there's a screen, if there's an ability to access videos and pictures, then you have a degree of danger there as well. So there's a possibility that a home assistant, depending on the one that you have, could also pose a spiritual danger, significantly more so a privacy or security danger, I would say, in the home assistants, and then any Internet of Things. These Internet of Things stuff that you get from China, all of these little light, you know, the smart light adapters and all of those things, most of those don't even have the basic security in them, so that if you had someone that knew what they were doing, they could get your Wi-Fi password very, very easily just by sniffing out that network for 10 or 20 minutes. Because they don't send, they've got your password sitting there unencrypted that they're sending back and forth to your Wi-Fi router. They don't implement any security in those. They're made in China. They're made to function. They're not made to matter, right? So there are some dangers there as well. But as far as spiritual goes, basically, it would only be to the extent that you have a speaker or a screen. However, these other ones, obviously, much larger spiritual dangers. I'm not ready to go there yet. Okay, so any question as it relates to this idea of the terminal, the actual hardware, the actual things that access the internet? And then we'll get to the software that runs on top of them. Okay. Software. There are three distinct methods of internet access. There's Ethernet, which is a wired connection to a local router. There's Wi-Fi, which is a wireless connection to a local router. And then there's a cellular and satellite, which is a wireless connection to a remote router. So the hardest one of those to be in control of, as you might imagine, is the cellular connection. And the reason why is because that connection connects to a tower that is not yours. You don't have any control over it. There are some degrees, some elements of parental control that cellular companies, depending on your cellular company, might have, where they would do some of that filtering for you. But what you lose when you don't have the access to the router is you lose a really important and powerful point of control on any network. So those are those three distinct methods of internet access. What are we doing here? Okay. I don't know why that switched for that other one, but anyway, software. Software refers to the programs and other operating information used by a computer or another electronic device. There are various types of software. The first type is called the operating system. This is the foundational software that manages all of the hardware and software resources of the computer. It's the software that runs, that allows you to run other programs. So on my phone, this has the Android operating system, as does my tablet. This computer runs the Windows operating system. If you have an iPhone, it runs iOS. If you have an iPad, it runs iPad OS. If you have a Mac, it runs Mac OS. All three of those are actually distinct operating systems. They're all different. Android has the same operating system for phones and tablets. Mac does not. Apple does not. Apple has a distinct operating system for phone, tablet, and for PC or for computer. That operating system is the foundational software. So if we're going to protect things in the software realm, it helps to have those protections go all the way down to the operating system level, because that is where things are going to be managed. And so as we're looking for software solutions, the best place to first look for those software solutions is at the operating system level, or ways that you can get down to the operating system level. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's in the operating system for Android, I have, in my connection settings, I have two things here, a VPN and a private DNS. DNS, we talked about last time, stands for Domain Name Service. The Domain Name Service, or Domain Name System, is the system that would take a web address, www.legacybaptistchurch.net, and would convert that web address to the IP, or the Internet Protocol address. So web address from an IP goes into the domain name system, and when it sees that I'm looking for HTTPS, legacybaptistchurch.net, it's going to convert that to a exclusive Internet Protocol address. In the case of legacybaptistchurch.net, as of now, it's 46.28.42.55. That can change, but if it does, it's fairly rare that it changes, but it can. And then that's going to take it to the server where all of the information is stored that I've put on that server for people to access. And of course, it's put on that server in a way that is intended to be read, namely by web browsers, also by an RSS feed, or perhaps a podcast application, which would usually be an RSS feed as well. See if I can get back down here. I'm jumping all around, and this program's not really great at doing that. So that's the operating system, and that foundational level. The next thing we have is application software. Now, this is what most of you are familiar with as it relates to interaction with the internet. Browsers, word processors, and then what have been colloquially now called apps, applications on an operating system. Those applications need to be compatible with your operating system because they're going to use, and the hardware, because they're going to use the operating system's features, functions, and components as a part of accessing. So in order for a browser to be able to access the internet, the browser has to get permission to do so from the operating system. And of course, the operating system has to be able to access the physical hardware that accesses the internet. The Wi-Fi card, the Ethernet card, they have to be able to access those. It all has to be able to talk to each other. So most of us are doing most of what we're doing either in apps or browsers. Browser, iPhone, you're most likely using Safari. Default on Windows, Safari on Mac as well. Default on Windows is now Microsoft Edge. Most people on Windows use Google Chrome. And then there's also Mozilla Firefox, and then various offshoots of all of those. I use a browser on all of my devices called Brave. We'll talk about why it is that I use Brave and some of the advantages of that as we go. And some of those advantages are privacy and security. Others are a part of this spiritual effort here. And word processors are another one that people regularly use. Those used to be very much so only on your computer. Nowadays, that's not the case. They're pretty strongly connected to the internet as well although depending on the one you use, you can still use it offline. And then the final idea with software is firmware. Firmware is a type of software that's permanently controlled in hardware. So a good example of this is the thermostat that's downstairs. That thermostat that's downstairs, I have lots of different settings for it. Whether it's on hot, cool, or auto. Whether the fan is set to circulate, turn on, or not come on except when the hot or the cool is coming on. Now, if the power goes out, all of those settings remain. That's because they're stored in a little bit of memory that's on the computer. Now, the actual system, the operating system, if you will, that's written into the firmware. The firmware of the thermostat has all the operating system, and then it's got a little bit of memory to hold my particular settings, except for one setting, and that one setting that it won't hold is the date and the time. And of course, that makes sense because unless you have an internal clock in the thing, it's not going to keep the date and the time, and because the thing's supposed to be connected to the internet, it doesn't matter. So that's the idea of firmware, and those are the specific aspects of software. Are there any questions about the software itself? So what we have is we have some sort of hardware, a phone, a computer, a toaster, whatever it is. And then that hardware is going to have on it an operating system, perhaps some firmware that has lower level software, and then it's going to have software that will run something. And that software and that operating system are intended to be the portal through which I am able to access whatever is on that machine. For a lot of smart home devices and whatnot, that's truly just a terminal, just enough power to access the internet. For a PC, there's a lot more things that it can do. A tablet, a smartphone, a lot more things it can do. But most of what you do on it is still going to be in a terminal fashion. You're accessing the internet and pulling down data, and you're interacting with that data. The next stop, so if I have some sort of terminal, and I open up an app in that terminal, so I have my operating system, Android, that's running on my hardware, which is my tablet, and I just opened up a browser, which is the software. And I'm going to go to legacybaptistchurch.net. And when I hit enter, I pull down, I guess I should probably get rid of all these warnings about where you move to now. It pulls down information from legacybaptistchurch.net, and it displays that information for me. What just happened there is that, in this case, I'm using my phone as a hotspot, so my tablet connects wirelessly to my phone, which is connected wirelessly to the towers of AT&T. And then those towers are connected by wire to the various servers of the internet service provider. So at this router point, that's where I would connect to those access points and then to the internet service providers. The router and the ISP would be one in this case. And then it is taking that request, which is legacybaptistchurch.net, and what it sends out is my IP address, which this is not my phone's IP address, but the unique identifier of my phone, the web address I'm looking for, and there will be some other things there as it relates to probably location and all of that stuff that's in the background. That's another thing for privacy and security more than spirituality. But it's sending that to my internet service provider, and my internet service provider is then routing that to a domain name system. Now, there's a default domain name system on these devices, or you can designate your own. And we're going to talk about designating your own domain name system so that you can have more control over it. When it gets there, legacybaptistchurch.net will be in their system, and it's going to be connected to the IP address of the computer that's storing all of the information that you just see here. So when I write out all this information, I save it into a server that's accessible and connected through my registration. I connect the server that I've got this information on to the name that I own. And once they're connected, then that filters through every domain name service around the world so that anybody who goes to legacybaptistchurch.net gets pointed to the exact same server, and then that server gives them these files that then come back to the computer. So they'll go back through the internet service provider, through whatever router, and then to my browser, and my browser then will interpret those files, read them, interpret them, and display the information that's supposed to be displayed from them. So that's the router. Now, you notice here I say router, firewall, and modem. Most of us today, if you own a device, you pay an internet service provider and they give you a box. And that box is going to have, it's going to have, well, kind of like this. It's going to have an antenna. It's going to have a bunch of these little ports on the front or on the back. And one of those ports is going to say WAN, and the rest of those ports are going to say LAN. WAN stands for Wide Area Network, and that would be the World Wide Web, the internet. That's what WWW stands for, World Wide Web. LAN stands for Local Area Network, and that's what you're going to plug whatever computers you might have in. And then, of course, you may not have any of those. Everything might be connecting over wireless, which means everything's going to connect through those antennas there. Now, that is technically your router. It's very possible that it's also your modem. So you have another cable that comes in. It might look like a coaxial cable. It might look like a fiber optic cable. And it's going to plug in. And what the modem does is the modem contains the firmware that talks to the individual internet service provider and says, this person is purchasing your service. This is your modem. You are supposed to give this person service. You can't just plug someone else's modem in. And if you can buy your own modem, then you have to be able to log in to prove that this is, you're allowed to use their bandwidth. And then a firewall is the thing in between. And, well, we didn't really talk about the idea of a router. We talked about the idea of a modem. And then we have the idea of a firewall. So the modem connects us to the internet service provider. The router, what the router does is the router takes any of the requests that are coming from a device and it routes them. It sends them where they need to go. There are certain things that might need to be internal. So let's say right now we have a wireless setup at Legacy Baptist Church, but we don't have internet. We have what's called a local area network. And the only thing on that local area network is a wireless router and a printer so that I can print wirelessly whatever I might need to print. So when my computer is looking for a printer, it's got a driver and it sees a printer on the network and it knows what that printer is. Now that printer also has an internet protocol device, number, excuse me. And so the router registers IP addresses. So the printer, I should probably be zooming in a lot more here so I can get more on this. So we have a printer, and typically with local IP, it'll look like 192.168.something.something. We'll say 0.1. And then the router also has an IP address, 192.168. Let's modify this a little bit to be accurate. Let's say 1.10, and this will be 1.1. And then we have a phone. And we're going to say the phone has 192.168.1.2. So these are all registered with the router. The router knows what's on the network. The phone is going to tap into the router and say, I'm looking for a printer. The router is going to give a list of all of the different IP addresses, and my phone is going to look at all of them, and it's going to find one that is a printer. And then I'm going to send a print to the printer, and the router is going to say, okay, this person is trying to send a print, 192.168.1.2 is trying to send a print to 192.168.1.10. And it sends that information, and the printer will either receive that information and say, thank you, I'm printing, or it'll say, I don't know what this is, go away, and the router will say, I'm sorry, I can't connect to that address. And that is what the router does. It just sends everything everywhere. If the IP address or the domain name is not registered in the router system, it will check the internet for it, if it has internet. And the router, again, might be the same as the modem, or they could be separate devices. And then you have the firewall. And the firewall is software that runs, and what the firewall is intended to do is make sure that everything that comes in and out of a network is approved. So there are approved IP addresses, there are approved domain names, there are approved amounts of data that can come through from approved sources. And if it's not approved, the firewall says, nope, you don't have access, go away. Most of our computers today have firewalls that keep the amount of I don't think I have access. I was just thinking if I could log into my firewall from home so I could show you. I might try to get that set up for future weeks. To see the sheer number of things, of random IP addresses that are knocking on the door of my network every single day, saying, I want in, I want in, I want in, and the router and the firewall saying, nope, 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 and rejecting them all. And because of the way my firewall is set up, the number of devices I have in my home that are trying to access Chinese websites, because I've got a smart plug here and a smart plug there, but I've got them setting up on a quarantined network where they don't get access to anything else in my system. And so they can phone home to China all day. Or anything in my system, I've got all of those IP addresses blocked so that they can't phone home. All of that is what the firewall is doing. Now, the firewall, router, and modem nowadays are usually one device. One device that controls all of those. It routes, it connects to your IP, or to your internet service provider, and it provides whatever firewall features you want. Some of them are more sophisticated, some of them are less sophisticated. There are also software firewalls. So my Brave browser has its own kind of firewall implementation. Most operating systems have their own firewall. As a matter of fact, every modern operating system has its own firewall. Just the kind of the list of things to keep out nefarious actors, and you can tap. The thing is you can tap into that firewall to set your own limits to what can and cannot be accessed. So that my firewall at home, if it sees any social media, anything, it blocks it. You try to go to TikTok, as soon as the firewall sees a TikTok IP address or a TikTok domain, it says nope. Now, it won't let it through, one way or the other. We have Facebook open for Marketplace. So Facebook we allow, and then every other social media is blocked. That's something that I put into that firewall and said, this is what I want. And the domain name service, I actually run my own domain name service on my firewall that everything runs through before it gets to the other domain name service, which I use OpenDNS. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And that way, down to the very domain level, everything is blocked. And I do the same for pornography and the like. So the firewall is very, very powerful. And this is one of the best places for you to be able to maintain control over your network as it relates to the various aspects of accessing the internet at home. That doesn't help you a whole lot when it comes to your phone because you don't have access to the router. If your ISP allows you to have some sort of parental filters, that's great. Some do, some don't. But most of what you're going to need to do on your phone, you're going to have to do on device. The nice thing, though, is when I'm at home, any device that is connected to my network, whether that's, like I said, whether that's a computer or a phone or my toaster. I don't have a smart toaster, or my toaster. Any device that's connected to the network has to go through my router and my firewall are the same device. And then it sends it to my modem. So everything has to go through there. So even my smart toaster has to pass through the firewall if it's going to get out or into my home or out of my home, which means the router and firewall give me absolute control over what comes in and out of my house as long as I know how to work with that. And so that's a very powerful point of ingress that is worth knowing about. I've still got some time. Let me see if I can re-log into this so I can get back up and running here because I don't know why it logged me out. But okay, let's see if this has more information or if, yep, there's more. Look at all those. Look at all those. All right, so now we've got more of this information that I was supposed to have. So a router is a device that receives and distributes data to their intended destinations on a network. Routers are often equipped with firmware, that is, equipped is spelled wrong, my apologies, that is able to read the content of the request and stop unauthorized access. That is called a firewall. Routers are often also paired with a wireless access point for Wi-Fi, is what we call it, connectivity. The router is the single most capable and effective device for filtering and protection. So, local. From an IP address, let's say a local address to some World Wide Web address, the web address or IP, whatever.com, right? Goes in. If it's a local IP, check IP blacklist, check the whitelist, check authorizations, check filters, and it sends it either to the World Wide Web or it sends it to a local IP address. The router is what determines all of that. It's what sends everything anywhere, but it doesn't do any of it unless it passes all of the checks and tests. Is this a domain you're not allowed to go to? Is this something that's off limits? Does it require a password? All of those things. And so it's a very, very powerful place. And if you can find out the capabilities of your router and whether or not your router has the ability to do that, what that will allow you to do is protect your entire home. So that if there's a device that does not have a cellular connection but is dependent upon your access point, your house, in order to function, then at that point you are safe. You're as safe as the router is able to make you, generally speaking. And we'll talk more about some of the ways to do that. And that's what, like my children have a phone at home, and the only thing that it has on it is an application called Threema. And it's a messaging application like WhatsApp or texting, and it does not require you to have a phone number connected to it. That phone is not connected to the wireless, to a network. It does not have a SIM card in it. It is only connected to our Wi-Fi. So anything that comes in and out has to go through that Wi-Fi, and that Wi-Fi is behind my router and my firewall. And so because of that, everything, that phone does not need its own software to run on it to protect it from anything because it's being protected by the router and the firewall. Everything is getting stopped before it even gets to the phone. Questions on routers now that we finally have our information back? Eric? So blacklists, and again, I have this sheet that I was supposed to give you and I didn't. A blacklist is any site that I have listed you may not go to. What you want is a whitelist. And a whitelist is you may not go to anything but what I say. Right. And so whitelists are a thing, and that's one thing that you can do. One of the other things, so there's several other issues there. Now, what you talked about as it relates to websites accessing other things, the first one of those is ads. And this is one of the things that we're going to get to in protection. Blocking ads is a gray area morally in our society because technically speaking, Most of the internet runs on advertisements. So if you block ads, you are actually blocking the revenue stream for all of these sites that are offering things for you. However, here's the problem. I don't have control over the advertisements. So I block every ad. I block every single ad. Now, you can do that through browsers. But I block it on the firewall level. Every single ad that hits that firewall goes away. So every phone, every computer, internet, my toaster will not have any advertisements on it. And the reason why I do that is because it's not because I want to steal from these companies, but it's because these companies do not have the ability to morally choose for me which it used to be that we could actually trust the FCC, that the advertisements, like say if you were watching, not cable, but if you were just watching, your I forget, what do they call, the standard channels? Broadcast? Your standard broadcast channels. They were very, very tightly shut down by the FCC on a television so that you knew that the ads you were going to see were somewhat rigorously vetted. Now that doesn't happen on those anymore either, but there are vetting agencies for online advertisements, but they are not too concerned about the moral standards that you might have. And so we just block the ads. Number one, it makes your internet go a whole lot faster. But the actual reason is because I do not want the ad for lingerie popping up when my children are just trying to access Threema and ask me a question on their phone. Laura? Correct. As soon as you use mobile data, I have no control over that. So everything that I'm talking about here, I'm talking about if you have control over the router. And I can have control over the router with an Ethernet connection, wired, or a Wi-Fi connection in my home. I don't have control over Starbucks' router, and I don't have control over my internet service provider's router. I only have control over mine. So this is protecting inside the home. As soon as you get a cell phone, everything changes, and that's where, one that's connected to the networks, and that's where on-device things help out a great deal. And there comes a point where you either are going to have to trust, or you're going to have to pay a reasonable amount of money, or you're going to have to be technically savvy enough to really, really lock things down. And at that point, you're probably choosing between privacy, security, and protection, because in order to really get a cell phone to be able to have the lowest level protections that you'd want, you have to what's called root your phone. And at that point, you're actually making it a very insecure phone, but you have a lot more control over it. So there are some trade-offs there. However, you can get software, like Eric mentioned, Covenant Eyes, that is fairly low level, and on an Android, not as easy on an iOS device, because they don't give you as much access to the operating system for security purposes. But on an Android device with Covenant Eyes, or with one of those programs, you can get pretty low level, and you can block things very well. And then as long as you have a password to then be able to not give access to that program, or not give access to certain aspects of the operating system, then you can do pretty well at protecting it. If you have a level of trust where, let's say, I as a husband want to protect myself from various aspects of falling into a danger, but I'm not as concerned that someone's going to try to it's not as concerning that I need high accountability maybe. And what I mean by that is, like, I don't necessarily need a password to say I'm not allowed to shut down the program that does all of these things. Things get a lot easier. If I have to have all that accountability to be able to say you need passwords to be able to stop people from trying to stop the program that's doing all the monitoring, things get a little more complicated, a little bit more expensive. So we'll get to that smartphone aspect in our solutions. That gets a lot more complicated. But as far as locking down your home, your actual home, it's not nearly as bad. And this is one of the areas that I think is most important. Remember, as we talk through all of this, there is going to be a point where you're simply going to have to teach your children and they're going to have integrity, and they're going to have to do what's right. Because internet access is everywhere, and the ability to lock down these devices and have this accountability does get very expensive as you add more devices. And so there are some trade-offs, but for me, I think a big part of this is simply, can you protect your family at home? And the reason why is because when they're out and about, there's generally more accountability. There's generally a reason why you're out and about. There are lots of other ways to get around things when you're out and about, but what you don't want is persons at home with lots of free time exploring the internet on their own, falling into places they should not, and the like. So we are going to focus on that, but we will get into smartphones as well, and tablets and laptops as it relates to going to public Wi-Fi hotspots and such, a lot of which, public hotspots, a lot of those have their own filters on them nowadays as well. But Amy, well, the question is, what are cookies? Now, a cookie is a small little packet of information that is put into on your browser, in your browser's application in the program memory from various websites. And cookies have multiple different functions. One of the functions of cookies is to track you, not just on the website, but as you go around the internet. So put a cookie on in the browser, and then as you go from site to site to site, it's sending back to Amazon, you visited this site and that site and that site. And that way, it's actually following you through the internet. And the general reason for those cookies is to be able to advertise to you better, to know what other places you're shopping at, to how long you spend here and there. And the ability for it's called fingerprinting. The ability for someone to fingerprint you online is pretty amazing. So when you go to a website, the number of things that a website logs about you, your IP address, what area of the country that IP address is from. If it can access your location data, it will access your actual physical location data, like on your phone if you gave your browser location data access or the app location data access. What the resolution of your screen is, what operating system it is, all of that stuff is right out there. And it will fingerprint you so that even if you're not logged in, if it's your IP address and your fingerprint, everything even if you're not logged in, it's going to retain that data and it's going to track you. And cookies are a big part of that. Cookies are also what saves login information. So if you've ever logged into a website and said, remember me, as soon as you say remember me, it puts a cookie in your browser so that the next time you come, it says this is who it is, this was their login, they are still logged in, you don't have to log in again. Very convenient, but then now you're always logged in and there's some security issues there and whatnot. So that's the idea of a cookie. Just a very, very small little bit of data that will tell the website things about you.
So when you
It depends on, that's more of a privacy thing. As far as a concern for security, the only security concern is if someone gets access to the device and you're already logged in, then they're logged in, right? So you go to a hotel and you're staying the night and you log into your bank to transfer some money for the next day, you don't log out. If cookies are on that machine, then somebody now has access to your bank and your bank account. Most of them today are pretty good at logging you out after a few hours and whatnot and all that, so it's good. Security's catching up, but it's more of a security that would be the security concern. The privacy concern is you're tracking me throughout the web. And if you ask those companies, they're not doing anything nefarious with that tracking data. They're just trying to sell you the most applicable pair of shoes, right? Other than that, no, there's not really a concern unless you don't want to be tracked. And if you want that privacy, then you change the way you browse to handle that. So there's a few different ways that I do that because I'm a very privacy conscious person. One of those is that, so I'm just transferring now. I basically always did private browser. Incognito, it's called in Chrome. And that doesn't stop anyone else from knowing what you're doing. It just stops the cookies from remaining on your system. Hang on just a sec. Let me make sure that we're okay. The only thing I have here is my check-in confirmation for my flight tomorrow. So let's see. I am a little bit off track here, but so in Brave, this is Brave's privacy settings. Now you notice one of the things that you can set in Brave is block fingerprinting, and that's trying to block websites from seeing all of the various aspects of your computer. Now if I looked at browsing data, browsing history, so in the last hour, it says that in my browsing history, there was 1.5 megabytes of cached images. So those are images that were loaded into my browser so that I wouldn't have to load them again the next time I visit. There are some cookies, and then there is browsing history here. And if I go to advanced, you'll see that there are 3 items in my browsing history. I actually have no cookies right now because I clear them out every time I leave my browser. And then there's less than 1 megabyte of cached images. I have no passwords. I don't save my passwords in a browser. I don't do any autofill form data. And then there's 1 site setting, which I would set to delete as well. So then every time my browser exits, I have clear all browsing data. Now I also have the idea of forget me when I close this site. So what I'm allowing myself to do now is the site can stay open in my browser and it can remember me, and then finally when I close out of that site, which may be some days later, right, because the browser will pop up with those in, that's when it's going to clear out all that browsing data. That makes the web a lot less convenient for me. But then I've got a few ways to mitigate that. One of those ways in Brave or in any Chrome browser is what's called profiles. And in Linux, I can do something a little bit different. But Chrome as a browser, goodness, why am I? I love this stuff, but it's probably a little outside the purview here. This is as a browser, Chrome has what's called a sandbox. And what a sandbox does is it makes it to where your individual tabs, if this is a tab, are not supposed to be able to see what the other tabs are up to. And this is a nice thing because as a general rule, they're allowed to see. Now, you can also do what's called profiles, and I keep drawing way too big to be able to make this work. So you have these tabs, and they're sandbox, but you can have what's called profiles. And if you add a new profile to your browser, everything in Profile 1 and Profile 2 are separate. So what I have done to get around the inconvenience of always clearing my cookies and having to log in every single time is I have a separate profile for anything where I want to access it regularly. My Amazon, if I wanted to do that, or my bank. I don't want my bank information on my normal browser where where if someone got access to my computer, they could just log in to my browser, whatever the case may be. But if I've got a separate profile, in that profile, the only thing I do with that is access my banking website. And so I've got that password saved there, and I don't have to punch it in every time. But then it does not have, the rest of my normal websites and whatnot, they don't know that I visited that bank website. They don't know that I punched in a password. They can't see any of those cookies because it's all in an entirely separate profile. And these are some of the ways that you can mitigate against a few of those privacy concerns if you have some of those. But they are not necessarily concerns as it relates to the dangers of the spiritual dangers. These are more the concerns that would be directly related to being tracked online. that sort of a thing, which is a big deal. It's a really, really big deal. But it's not a spiritual deal, I mean, until martyrdom starts, and then I suppose it does, because then they're, the credit card company knows when you, now they started flagging gun purchases or any purchases at gun stores, right? There's a reason why they're starting to flag gun store purchases. And so those are the things where right now it's not a big deal because we have a Second Amendment, but if that Second Amendment were to go tomorrow, and then all of a sudden they have a big long list of everyone who went and purchased at a gun store, that's where privacy becomes a potential issue for the church. But it's not necessarily an issue today. Cookies are not an issue in that way today. Good question. Any other questions? Okay, so next time we're together, we will continue then, we'll go past the router, and we'll get to, let's see, where are we at? We'll talk about the internet service provider. And we'll talk about the various aspects of an internet service provider itself and what it can do for us and how it can help us, how it can hinder us. And then we'll talk about the DNS, and the DNS will be the next big place that really provides an opportunity for you to protect yourself. And that one can actually protect your smartphone too, because your smartphone has an IP address that has to go through a DNS as well. So if I designate the DNS on my phone, and then I'm able to use a program to keep that DNS updated with my IP address, because that can change, then I might just be able to get away with DNS protection that can be pretty robust.